The howling prairie winds rattled the wooden slats of the Willow Creek cattle barn as Cora Haverly stumbled through the doorway, her body quaking from cold and exhaustion. The storm had caught her unawares on her journey back to town, and now the icy tendrils of winter's first blizzard threatened to claim her life in the vastness of the Montana Territory. Cora collapsed onto a pile of hay, her soaked dress clinging to her slender frame as she fought to control her trembling. The year was 1882, and the frontier was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. Her aunt had warned her not to make the journey to deliver medicine to the widow Jensen, but stubborn pride had pushed her forward. Now, as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, that same pride might be the death of her. The barn door suddenly creaked open, sending a fresh gust of frigid air swirling around her. Cora shrank back, instinctively hiding herself deeper in the shadows. Footsteps crunched on the straw-covered floor, heavy, masculine footsteps. The silhouette of a tall man appeared, backlit by a lantern he carried. "Hello, anyone in here?" His voice was deep, with a hint of a southern drawl. Cora's teeth chattered as she debated whether to answer. She had heard stories of unsavory characters roaming these parts, taking advantage of vulnerable travelers. A violent shiver gave her away, rustling the hay. The man turned, raising his lantern. "Who's there?" He moved closer, and the light illuminated his features' strong jaw covered in stubble, eyes sharp but not unkind, the weathered face of a man who spent his days under the sun. "Just a traveler," Cora managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The storm." Recognition dawned on his face. "Miss Haverly, from town." He stepped closer, concern etching lines around his eyes. "Good Lord, you're half frozen." Cora recognized him now, Owen Blackwood, one of the hands from the Circle B ranch. She'd seen him in town occasionally, tipping his hat politely when they passed on the boardwalk, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged, trying to maintain some dignity despite her pitiful state. Without hesitation, Owen shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The residual warmth from his body enveloped her, and the coat carried his scent: leather, horses, and something distinctly masculine. "Stay," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're in no condition to go anywhere tonight." He crouched beside her, assessing her condition with a practiced eye. "This storm's turned into a real monster. I came to check on Mr. Benson's cattle. Lucky thing I did." "I need to get back to town," Cora protested weakly, though the warmth of his coat was already seeping into her bones, making the prospect of venturing back into the blizzard seem like madness. Owen shook his head. "Not tonight, you don't. That'd be a death sentence, Miss Haverly." He stood and moved about the barn, gathering more hay to create a makeshift bed. "I've got some supplies on my horse. We'll wait out the storm here." Cora watched him work, a strange mixture of gratitude and unease washing over her. She had been raised to be proper, and spending the night alone with a man even in these dire circumstances was scandalous. But as another violent shiver racked her body, practicality overruled propriety. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his coat tighter around her. Owen returned with a canteen and a small bundle. "Drink this," he said, offering her water. "And I've got some jerky and hardtack. Not fancy, but it'll keep your strength up." Their fingers brushed as she accepted the canteen, and despite her chilled state, Cora felt a different kind of warmth rise to her cheeks. "What brings you out in this weather, Miss Haverly?" Owen asked as he built a small, controlled fire in an iron brazier he'd found in the corner of the barn. Cora explained about the widow Jensen's fever and the medicine she'd delivered. "I thought I could make it back before the storm worsened. I was wrong." Owen nodded, his expression somber. "Brave of you, foolish, but brave." A small smile softened his words. That's the frontier for you, rewards the brave, punishes the foolish, and sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. The fire cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw and the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the Eastern gentleman Cora's Aunt always hoped she would marry. But there was something compelling about him, an authenticity that made those polished city men seem like poor imitations of what a man should be. "You're from back east, aren't you?" Owen asked, settling down a respectful distance from her. Cora nodded. "Boston. I came west after my parents died. My aunt is my only family." "I'm sorry about your folks," he said, his voice genuine. "Lost mine young too, father to a mining accident, mother to consumption shortly after." "Is that when you became a cowboy?" Cora asked, finding herself curious about this man who had likely saved her life. Owen chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "Been working cattle since I was 12. Started as a wrangler's assistant in Texas, worked my way up. Followed the herds north, and something about this Montana sky made me want to stay." Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, but inside the barn, with the small fire crackling and Owen's coat wrapped around her, Cora felt an unexpected sense of security. "You should try to sleep," Owen suggested. "I'll keep watch, make sure the fire doesn't spread." Cora nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. She lay down on the hay bed he'd prepared, still wrapped in his coat. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." His eyes met hers, serious now. "Don't think on it, just rest." As Cora drifted toward sleep, the last thing she saw was Owen's silhouette against the firelight, solid and vigilant, like a guardian keeping the dangers of the night at bay. Morning came with the soft, muffled quiet that follows a heavy snowfall. Cora woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. The memories of the previous night flooded back as she saw Owen tending to the fire, adding small sticks to coax the embers back to life. "Good morning," he said, noticing her stirring. "Storm's passed, but we've got near 2 feet of snow out there." Cora sat up, aware that she was still wearing his coat. "You must be freezing." Owen shrugged. "I'm used to the cold. Besides, I stayed close enough to the fire." He offered her a tin cup. "Made some coffee. It's strong, but it's hot." Cora accepted the cup gratefully, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "How far are we from town?" "About 5 miles, Owen replied, glancing toward the door. "But with the snow this deep, it'll be slow going. I figure we should wait a bit, let the sun do some work on the drifts." Cora nodded, sipping the bitter coffee. It was indeed strong, but the heat and caffeine were reviving. "My aunt will be worried sick." "Can't be helped," Owen said pragmatically. "Better to have her worried than to have you frozen in a snowdrift." There was logic in his words, but Cora still felt a pang of guilt. Aunt Beatrice had taken her in after her parents' deaths, uprooting her own comfortable life to move west when Cora had been unable to bear remaining in Boston with its painful memories. "Tell me about your work at the ranch," Cora said, eager to distract herself from thoughts of her aunt's worry. Owen's face brightened as he spoke about the Circle B. He described the changing seasons on the range, the spring calving, the summer drives, and the autumn roundups. His hands, rough and calloused, gestured expressively as he talked about the land he clearly loved. "Mr. Benson's a fair boss," Owen explained. "Pays well, treats his men right. I've been saving to get my own spread someday." A touch of self-consciousness crossed his features. "Not that I've got much to show for it yet." "It's a worthy ambition," Cora said sincerely, "to build something of your own." Owen's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of similar dreams despite their different backgrounds. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hooves crunching through snow. Owen was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed, moving cautiously toward the barn door. Cora held her breath as Owen cracked the door open and peered out. His shoulders relaxed almost immediately. "It's a search party from town," he announced, turning back to her with relief in his eyes. "Looks like your aunt raised the alarm." Mixed emotions washed over Cora, relief that help had come, but an unexpected reluctance to leave the cocoon of warmth and unexpected companionship she'd found in the barn. Owen opened the door wider and waved to the approaching riders. "Over here," he called out. 3 men on horseback approached, led by Sheriff Wallace, with the town doctor and Cora's neighbor, Mr. Peterson, following close behind. "Miss Haverly," Sheriff Wallace exclaimed as they dismounted, "your aunt is beside herself with worry when you didn't return last night." "I got caught in the storm," Cora explained, standing up and moving toward the door, still wrapped in Owen's coat. "Mr. Blackwood found me and offered shelter." The sheriff's eyes moved from Cora to Owen, assessing the situation. Owen met his gaze steadily, no hint of apology in his stance. "Blackwood," the sheriff acknowledged with a nod. "Good thing you were around." "Just checking on Mr. Benson's cattle," Owen replied evenly. "Couldn't leave the lady to freeze." Dr. Morris stepped forward. "Are you hurt, Miss Haverly? Any signs of frostbite?" "No, doctor, Mr. Blackwood ensured I stayed warm." As the words left her mouth, Cora realized they might be misconstrued, and a blush crept up her cheeks. "That is, he gave me his coat and built a fire." The doctor nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Nevertheless, I'd like to examine you once we get you back to town. Exposure can be tricky." Mr. Peterson had brought an extra horse for Cora. As she prepared to mount, she realized she was still wearing Owen's coat. "Your coat," she said, beginning to remove it. Owen shook his head. "Keep it for the ride. It's still bitter cold out there." Their eyes met again, and Cora felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold or her ordeal. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Owen helped her onto the horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Take care, Miss Haverly," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Maybe I'll see you in town sometime." "I'd like that," Cora replied, surprising herself with her boldness. As the small party rode away from the barn, Cora looked back once to see Owen standing in the doorway, watching her go. Something had changed in the night, something neither of them had expected. And as the barn receded into the distance, Cora knew with certainty that she would indeed be seeing Owen Blackwood again. The ride back to Willow Creek was slow and arduous. The horses struggled through the deep snow, and despite Owen's coat, the cold bit at Cora's exposed face and hands. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, her cheeks were numb and her fingers stiff within her gloves. Aunt Beatrice was waiting on the porch of their modest home, her normally composed face etched with worry. When she spotted Cora among the riders, she rushed down the steps, heedless of the snow, and ran to meet them. "Cora! Oh, thank the Lord!" she cried, reaching up to help her niece dismount. It was only when Cora was safely on the ground that Aunt Beatrice seemed to notice the oversized men's coat she wore. Her eyebrows rose questioningly. "Mr. Blackwood lent it to me," Cora explained quickly. "He found me sheltering in the Benson cattle barn and kept me from freezing." "Blackwood?" "The cowhand from Circle B." Aunt Beatrice's expression was unreadable. Sheriff Wallace dismounted, tipping his hat to Beatrice. "If not for Blackwood, we might be having a very different conversation today, Mrs. Perkins. He did right by your niece." Aunt Beatrice nodded stiffly. "Then we owe him our gratitude. Please, all of you come inside. I've got coffee brewing and stew on the stove." Dr. Morris insisted on examining Cora before accepting any refreshments. He pronounced her remarkably well, considering her ordeal with only minor frostbite on 2 fingers of her right hand. "Keep them warm and apply this salve," he instructed, handing Aunt Beatrice a small tin. "She should be fine in a few days." Once the men had been fed and had departed with profuse thanks from Aunt Beatrice, Cora found herself alone with her aunt in their small parlor. The older woman sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. "I should never have let you go," she said finally, her voice tight with emotion. "When the storm blew in and you didn't return." "I'm sorry to have worried you," Cora said sincerely. "I thought I had time before the weather turned." Aunt Beatrice's gaze fell on Owen's coat, which Cora had carefully hung by the door. "And this Mr. Blackwood, he behaved as a gentleman." Cora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Absolutely. He was nothing but respectful and kind. He even stayed awake all night to tend the fire while I slept." Something in Aunt Beatrice's expression softened. "Then we do indeed owe him a debt of gratitude." She hesitated, then asked, "Is he young?" "Around 30, I'd guess," Cora replied, trying to keep her tone casual despite the way her heart had inexplicably quickened. "He works as a foreman at Circle B. He mentioned he's saving to buy his own ranch someday." "I see." Aunt Beatrice studied her niece's face carefully. "Well, we must return his coat with proper thanks. Perhaps I'll bake a pie." Cora smiled, relieved that her aunt wasn't going to press the matter further. "I'm sure he would appreciate that." That night, as Cora lay in her bed, warm and safe, her thoughts kept returning to the barn and to Owen Blackwood. There had been something in his eyes when he looked at her, something that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just that he had saved her life. It was the way he had done it with quiet competence and without expectation of reward or recognition. She fell asleep thinking of his voice, that gentle drawl when he had wrapped his coat around her shoulders and simply said, "Stay." 3 days passed before Cora felt well enough to venture out again. Her frostbitten fingers were healing nicely, though they remained sensitive to cold. Aunt Beatrice had indeed baked an apple pie, wrapping it carefully in a cloth along with Owen's cleaned and pressed coat. "I can take these to the Circle B," Cora suggested over breakfast. "The stage to Helena passes right by there." Aunt Beatrice looked up from her needlework, her expression skeptical. "After what happened the last time you went out alone, I think not." "The weather is clear now," Cora argued, "and I'll stay on the stage the entire time. Mr. Benson's ranch house is right on the main road." After further discussion and a promise to return on the afternoon stage, Aunt Beatrice reluctantly agreed. Cora tried not to appear too eager as she prepared for the journey, but her heart raced at the thought of seeing Owen again. The morning stage was only half full, with most travelers heading toward Helena rather than stopping at the smaller settlements along the way. Cora sat by the window, the coat and pie carefully placed on the seat beside her. The snow-covered landscape glittered in the sunlight, beautiful now that it no longer posed a threat. When the stage reached the turnoff for the Circle B, Cora asked the driver to stop. He looked dubious about leaving a young woman at what appeared to be an empty crossroads, but Cora pointed to the ranch house visible in the distance. "I'm just returning something to one of the hands," she explained. "I'll be back for the afternoon stage." Reluctantly, the driver helped her down, warning her not to miss the return trip. "Last stage through here today," he cautioned. "Don't want to be stranded twice in 1 week." Cora assured him she would be punctual and set off down the snow-packed drive toward the ranch house. The main building was substantial, with smoke curling from 2 chimneys. Several outbuildings and corrals surrounded it, and in the distance, Cora could see cattle gathered in a sheltered valley. As she approached, A dog began to bark, alerting the household to her presence. A woman emerged onto the porch, plump, gray-haired, with a kind face creased by sun and smiles. "Can I help you, miss?" she called out. Cora introduced herself and explained her errand. "I'm looking for Mr. Blackwood. He works here, I believe." The woman's face brightened with recognition. "Owen." "Yes, indeed. I'm Mrs. Benson. My husband owns this ranch." She gestured for Cora to come inside. "Owen's out with the herd, but he should be back for dinner. You're welcome to wait." Cora hesitated, mindful of the stage schedule. "I need to catch the afternoon stage back to town." Mrs. Benson waved dismissively. "Plenty of time for that. Come in and warm yourself. I've just made coffee." The ranch house was warm and inviting, with polished wooden floors and simple but comfortable furnishings. Mrs. Benson led Cora to the kitchen, a large, bright room dominated by a massive cookstove and a long table that could easily seat 12. "So you're the young lady Owen rescued," Mrs. Benson said as she poured coffee into a china cup, a touch of refinement that surprised Cora. "He mentioned it when he came back the next day, though he didn't go into details." Cora accepted the coffee gratefully. "He saved my life," she said simply. "I wanted to return his coat and thank him properly." She placed the wrapped pie on the table. "My aunt baked this as a small token of our appreciation." Mrs. Benson smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Owen's got a powerful weakness for apple pie. He'll be pleased." She studied Cora with undisguised interest. "You're from back east, aren't you? I can tell by your speech." "Boston," Cora confirmed. "My aunt and I moved here 3 years ago, after my parents passed." "It's not an easy life out here," Mrs. Benson observed, "especially for women used to city comforts. But there's something about this land that gets into your blood." Cora nodded, thinking of how Owen had described his attachment to the Montana sky. "It's beautiful in its own way. Different from what I knew, but compelling." They chatted easily for nearly an hour, with Mrs. Benson sharing stories of her 30 years on the frontier. She had come west as a young bride, following her husband's dream of building a cattle empire. "We started with just 50 head, and this house wasn't much more than a cabin," she recalled. "Now we run over 2,000 cattle and ship beef as far as Chicago." The sound of men's voices and the stamping of horses announced the return of the ranch hands. Mrs. Benson rose, smiling. "That'll be them now. Let me see if Owen's among them." She disappeared through the door that led to the front of the house. Cora felt a sudden flutter of nerves and smoothed her skirts, wishing she'd worn something nicer than her practical wool traveling dress. A moment later, Owen appeared in the doorway, stopping short when he saw her. He had removed his hat, and his dark hair was tousled. His cheeks were reddened from the cold, but his eyes, those expressive eyes that had haunted Cora's dreams, lit up with unmistakable pleasure. "Miss Haverly," he said, his voice warm with surprise. "This is unexpected." Cora stood, suddenly feeling shy. "I came to return your coat." "And to thank you properly." She gestured to the wrapped pie. "My aunt baked this for you." Owen stepped into the kitchen, removing his gloves. He looked different here in his workplace, more confident, more at ease. "You didn't need to come all this way," he said, though his smile suggested he was glad she had. "I wanted to," Cora replied simply. Mrs. Benson cleared her throat, reminding them of her presence. "Owen, why don't you show Miss Haverly around while I finish preparing dinner?" "You've got time before she needs to catch the stage." Owen nodded, looking to Cora for agreement. "Would you like to see the ranch?" "I'd love to," she replied, meaning it. He waited while she donned her coat and bonnet, then led her outside into the crisp winter air. The sun was bright in a cloudless sky, taking some of the edge off the cold. "Mr. Benson runs one of the best operations in the territory," Owen explained as they walked. He was one of the first to bring Herefords up from Texas to crossbreed with the Longhorns. Makes for better beef. He showed her the barns, the blacksmith's forge, and the bunkhouse where most of the hands lived. "I've got a small cabin of my own," he pointed out, indicating a neat structure set a little apart from the other buildings. "One of the privileges of being foreman." Cora listened, fascinated not just by what he was saying but by the passion with which he spoke. This was a man who loved his work, who took pride in being part of something successful. They ended their tour at the main corral, where several horses were kept for daily use. A beautiful bay mare trotted over to the fence when she saw Owen, nickering softly. "This is Duchess," Owen said, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "Best cutting horse on the ranch." "She's beautiful," Cora murmured, cautiously extending her hand to the mare, who sniffed it curiously. "She likes you," Owen observed, watching as Duchess nudged Cora's palm. "She's usually wary of strangers." Their eyes met over the horse's head, and Cora felt that same flutter in her chest. "Animals can sense things about people," she said softly. "Yes, they can," Owen agreed, his gaze steady on hers. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then the ranch bell rang, signaling dinner time. "We should head back," Owen said reluctantly. "Mrs. Benson will be serving dinner, and you've got a stage to catch." As they walked back to the house, their hands brushed accidentally. Cora felt a jolt of awareness at the brief contact, and when she glanced at Owen, the slight flush on his cheeks suggested he had felt it too. Mr. Benson, a tall, silver-haired man with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in the elements, greeted Cora warmly when they entered the dining room. "So you're the young lady who got caught in last week's blizzard," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "Glad to see you looking so well." The long table was crowded with ranch hands of various ages, all of whom had clearly made an effort to clean up before dinner. They nodded respectfully to Cora as she took her seat, with Owen sitting across from her. The meal was simple, but abundant: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that Mrs. Benson had preserved from her summer garden. The conversation flowed easily, with the men discussing the day's work and Mr. Benson outlining plans for the spring calving season. Cora found herself drawn into discussions about the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Montana climate, and the difficulties of getting fair prices from the eastern meat packing companies. She was surprised by how much she enjoyed the frank, practical conversation so different from the polite, often superficial dialogue of Boston society dinners. Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of Owen's presence across the table. Several times she glanced up to find him watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Each time their eyes met, that now familiar flutter returned to her chest. All too soon, Mr. Benson glanced at the clock on the mantel. "If you're to catch the stage, Miss Haverly, you'd best be on your way. It comes through at 3 sharp." Owen immediately stood. "I'll drive you to the crossroads," he offered. Cora thanked Mrs. Benson for her hospitality as she prepared to leave. The older woman pressed her hand warmly. "You come back and visit us anytime," she said, with a meaningful glance at Owen. "We don't get many young ladies out this way." Outside, Owen helped Cora into a small buggy and tucked a blanket around her legs. "It's not a long drive, but there's no sense in you getting cold," he explained. As they set off down the driveway, a comfortable silence fell between them. The only sounds were the horses' steady hoofbeats and the creak of the buggy wheels on the packed snow. "Thank you for showing me the ranch," Cora said finally. "It's impressive what the Bensons have built here." Owen nodded. "They're good people, treated me fair from the start." He hesitated, then added, "I've been with them for 8 years now. Started as just another hand, worked my way up to foreman." "You must be very good at what you do," Cora observed. Owen shrugged modestly. I understand cattle and horses, people too, mostly. He glanced at her. Your aunt, she's raising you on her own, Cora nodded. She never married, left her life in Boston to come west with me after my parents died. I was 18 and lost. She's been my anchor. That's a special kind of love, Owen said quietly, to uproot yourself for someone else's sake. They had reached the crossroads, but there was no sign yet of the approaching stage. Owen drew the buggy to a halt and set the brake. For a moment they sat in silence, both aware that their time together was drawing to a close. Miss Haverly, Owen began. Please call me Cora, she interrupted. A smile touched his lips. Cora then, and I'm Owen. Owen, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her tongue. He seemed to gather his courage before continuing. Cora, I'd like to call on you properly, if that would be acceptable, in town with your aunt's permission. Cora's heart leapt, but she tried to keep her expression composed. I would like that very much, she replied, unable to keep a smile from spreading across her face. Relief and pleasure mingled in Owen's expression. Good, that's good, he cleared his throat. I get every other Sunday off. Would this coming Sunday be too soon? Not at all, Cora assured him, already looking forward to it. The distant rumble of the approaching stage caught their attention. Owen jumped down from the buggy and came around to help Cora descend. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, just as they had been when he'd helped her onto the horse after the storm. As the stage drew nearer, Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. I found this in the barn after you left, he said, holding out a delicate silver locket. I thought it might be yours. Cora gasped in recognition. My mother's locket, I thought I'd lost it forever. She accepted it with trembling fingers. It must have fallen off during the storm. Thank you for returning it. Their hands touched as she took the locket, and neither seemed willing to break the contact. The stage was now visible down the road, the team of horses trotting steadily toward them. Sunday, then, Owen said softly, reluctantly releasing her hand. Sunday, Cora confirmed, her voice equally soft. As the stage pulled up beside them, Owen helped her aboard, handing up the coat he had loaned her, now neatly folded. Their eyes met one last time before the driver cracked his whip and the stage lurched forward. Cora watched through the window as Owen's figure grew smaller in the distance, standing tall at the crossroads until a bend in the road finally took him from her sight. That Sunday dawned clear and cold, with a pale winter sun casting long shadows across the fresh snow. Cora had spent the previous days in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between excitement at seeing Owen again and anxiety about what her aunt would think of him. To her relief, Aunt Beatrice had been surprisingly receptive when Cora had mentioned Owen's intention to call. He saved your life, she had pointed out practically. The least we can do is receive him properly. Now, as the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour of 2, Cora found herself changing her dress for the third time. She finally settled on a blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, with a hint of lace at the collar and cuffs feminine without being overly fussy. You look lovely, dear, Aunt Beatrice said when Cora came downstairs. Though I'm not sure why you're making such an effort for a ranch hand. He's the foreman, Cora corrected gently, and he's different from what you might expect. Aunt Beatrice raised an eyebrow but said nothing further as she arranged a plate of cookies on the parlor table. The knock at the door came precisely at 2 o'clock, and Cora had to restrain herself from rushing to answer it. Owen stood on the porch, looking almost unrecognizable in a clean, pressed suit and polished boots. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his stubble to a respectable shadow. In one hand, he held a small bouquet of hothouse flowers and expensive luxury in the middle of a Montana winter. Miss Haverly, He greeted her formally then, with a nod toward Aunt Beatrice, who had appeared behind Cora. "Mrs. Perkins, thank you for receiving me." "Mr. Blackwood," Aunt Beatrice acknowledged. "Please come in. We have coffee prepared." Owen handed the flowers to Cora, their fingers brushing briefly. "These are for both of you," he said. "A small token of appreciation for the pie. It was the best I've had since my mother's." Aunt Beatrice's expression softened slightly at the compliment. "You're welcome. It was the least we could do, considering what you did for Cora." They settled in the small parlor, with Aunt Beatrice presiding over the coffee pot. The conversation was initially stilted, with Owen clearly working to mind his grammar and Aunt Beatrice asking polite but probing questions about his background and prospects. "I understand you aspire to have your own ranch someday," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. Owen nodded, accepting the cup carefully. "Yes, madam, I've been saving for it. Got my eye on a parcel of land up near the Judith Basin. Good water rights, decent grazing. And you believe you can support a family on such an enterprise?" Aunt Beatrice asked bluntly. "Aunt Beatrice," Cora exclaimed, mortified. Owen, however, didn't seem offended. "It's a fair question," he said, meeting the older woman's gaze directly. "And yes, I believe I can. I've been studying the cattle business from all angles for 15 years now. I know what works and what doesn't." There was quiet confidence in his voice, not boastfulness but the assurance of a man who knew his own abilities. Aunt Beatrice studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if he had passed some private test. "I understand you're originally from Texas." The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Owen sharing stories of his youth on the southern plains and his journey north with the great cattle drives. He spoke intelligently about the changing frontier, the coming of the railroads, and how it was affecting the cattle industry. "The days of the long drives are numbered," he predicted. "With the railroads pushing farther west each year, it'll soon be more efficient to ship cattle by train." Cora watched him as he spoke, struck by the thoughtfulness behind his words. This was no uneducated cowhand, but a man who had learned through experience and observation, who thought deeply about the world around him. As the afternoon progressed, even Aunt Beatrice seemed to warm to him, especially when the conversation turned to books, and it emerged that Owen was an avid reader despite his limited formal education. "My mother taught me to read when I was young," he explained. "Said a man who can read is never truly alone. I keep a small library in my cabin, history mostly, and some poetry." "Poetry?" Cora asked, surprised and delighted. A slight flush colored Owen's cheeks. "Whitman, primarily. His work speaks to me, all that celebration of the open road, the vastness of America." "I am not to speak to you, I am to think of you when I sit alone or wake at night alone," Cora quoted softly. "I am to wait. I do not doubt I am to meet you again." Owen's eyes widened in recognition of the lines from "To a Stranger," and something passed between them, a connection deeper than shared circumstances or mutual attraction. Aunt Beatrice cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Perhaps, Mr. Blackwood, you would care to accompany Cora and me to church next Sunday. We could have dinner afterward." It was an invitation that spoke volumes, a public acknowledgement that Owen was considered a suitable companion for her niece. "I would be honored, Mrs. Perkins," Owen replied, his eyes still on Cora. When it was time for him to leave, Aunt Beatrice tactfully excused herself to the kitchen, leaving Cora to see him out. At the door, Owen paused, seeming reluctant to go. "Your aunt is formidable," he said with a small smile. "But kind, I think." "She's protective," Cora explained. "But she likes you, I can tell." Owen reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "And you, Cora, what do you think of me?" The directness of the question took her breath away, but she answered with equal honesty. "I think you're the most genuine person I've ever met, and I like you very much." His hands tightened around hers. "I've thought of nothing but you since that night in the barn," he confessed, his voice low. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know there are differences between us, your education, my circumstances, but I feel something for you that I've never felt before." Cora's heart raced at his words. "I feel it too," she whispered. For a moment, it seemed he might kiss her, and despite all propriety, Cora found herself hoping he would. Instead, Owen raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both respectful and intimate. "Until next Sunday," he said, his eyes conveying what he didn't put into words. "Until then," Cora replied, watching as he walked down the path to where his horse was tethered, turning once to look back at her before mounting and riding away. The weeks that followed took on a pattern. Owen would come to town each Sunday, attend church with Cora and her aunt, and stay for dinner afterward. Sometimes, weather permitting, they would take walks through town or along the river, always properly chaperoned by Aunt Beatrice, who maintained a discreet distance. During these walks, they talked endlessly, sharing childhood memories, dreams for the future, opinions on everything from politics to literature. With each conversation, the connection between them deepened, transcending the differences in their backgrounds. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing muddy streets and the first tentative green shoots. Calving season kept Owen busier than ever at the ranch, but he never missed a Sunday visit, sometimes riding through difficult conditions to keep his promise. One Sunday in early April, as they walked by the river now swollen with snowmelt, Owen spoke of his plans more specifically than he had before. "Mr. Benson has offered to sell me 50 head of cattle at a fair price when I'm ready to start my own operation," he explained, his face animated with excitement. "With what I've saved and what the bank's willing to lend based on my reputation, I could make an offer on that land in the Judith Basin by summer's end." Cora listened, caught up in his enthusiasm. "It sounds wonderful, Owen. Your own ranch at last." He stopped walking, turning to face her. Behind them, Aunt Beatrice had paused to examine some early wildflowers, giving them a moment of relative privacy. "There's something I need to ask you, Cora," Owen said, his expression suddenly serious. "Something I've been thinking about for weeks now." Cora's heart began to race as she recognized the significance of his tone. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards," Owen continued, "but I feel like I've known you all my life in the ways that matter." He took her gloved hands in his. "I love you, Cora Haverly. I think I started falling in love with you that night in the barn when you were so brave despite everything." Tears welled in Cora's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "I don't have much to offer yet," Owen went on. "Just my name, my work, and my promise to build something worthy of you. But if you'd consent to be my wife, I swear I'd spend every day trying to make you happy." "Oh, Owen," Cora whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, so much." His face lit up with such joy that it nearly took her breath away. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a smile breaking across his features. "Yes," Cora replied without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Owen looked for a moment as if he might sweep her into his arms, propriety be damned, but instead he raised her hands to his lips, kissing each one reverently. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said, his voice husky with emotion. Aunt Beatrice, who had been keeping a respectful distance, now approached, having apparently sensed the significance of the moment. Her expression was knowing as she took in their clasped hands and radiant faces. "I believe congratulations are in order," she inquired, though it wasn't really a question. Owen straightened, still holding Cora's hand. "Mrs. Perkins, I've asked Cora to be my wife, and she's done me the honor of accepting. With your blessing, of course," he added hastily. Aunt Beatrice's face softened into a genuine smile. "You have it, Mr. Blackwood Owen. I've watched you these past months, and I've seen the kind of man you are. More importantly, I've seen how you look at my niece and how she looks at you." She reached out to pat his arm. "Love is a rare and precious thing. I'm glad Cora has found it." Owen's surprise at her ready acceptance was evident, but it quickly gave way to gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. I promise to take good care of her." "I know you will," Aunt Beatrice replied. "Now shall we head back? I believe this calls for a special dinner." As they walked back toward town, Owen and Cora couldn't stop smiling at each other, their hearts full of plans and promises for the future they would build together. The wedding was set for late September, after the fall roundup, when Owen would have fulfilled his commitment to the Circle B for the season. It gave them time to prepare, and for Owen to finalize his purchase of the land in the Judith Basin. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Cora and Aunt Beatrice worked on a simple trousseau, while Owen divided his time between his duties at the ranch and preparing for their future. He made several trips to the Judith Basin, returning each time with more detailed plans for the house he intended to build on their land. "It won't be grand at first," he warned Cora one Sunday as they sat on the porch of her aunt's house, looking over rough sketches he had drawn. "Just 4 rooms to start, but built solid, with room to expand as our family grows." Cora's heart warmed at his mention of a family. "It will be perfect," she assured him. "A home we'll build together." June brought news that the railroad would be extending a spur line through the Judith Basin the following year, a development that would significantly increase the value of their land and make it easier to ship cattle to market. "It's a sign," Owen declared when he brought the news. "Everything's falling into place." Even Aunt Beatrice was caught up in the excitement, making plans to relocate with them. "You'll need help, especially at first," she insisted when Cora protested that she needn't uproot herself again. "Besides, what would I do here alone? You two are my family now." By August, Owen had secured the land, 300 acres of prime grazing with a creek running through it and stands of timber for building. The bank in Helena had approved his loan based on his reputation, and the security of the cattle Mr. Benson had agreed to sell him. "It's ours, Cora," he said when he brought the signed deed to show her. "Our future." September arrived with perfect weather, warm days and cool nights, the hills turning gold with autumn's touch. The wedding was to be held in the small church in Willow Creek, with a reception afterward at the town hall. Mr. and Mrs. Benson had insisted on providing the beef for the feast, and the women of the town had rallied around to help with preparations. The night before the wedding, Cora stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the stars that shone so brightly in the Montana sky. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Owen Blackwood, beginning a new chapter in her life far different from anything she had imagined growing up in Boston. There was a soft knock at her door, and Aunt Beatrice entered, carrying a small box. "I thought you might like to have this for tomorrow," she said, placing the box in Cora's hands. "It was your mother's. She wore it on her wedding day." Inside was a delicate lace handkerchief, yellowed with age but still beautiful. "Something old," Aunt Beatrice explained. "For luck." Tears filled Cora's eyes as she carefully lifted the handkerchief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I wish she could be here." Aunt Beatrice embraced her. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Cora, and she would approve of Owen, I'm certain of it." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect. Cora dressed in a simple gown of ivory silk that Aunt Beatrice had helped her make, with her mother's locket around her neck, and the lace handkerchief tucked into her sleeve. Her hair was arranged simply, with sprigs of wildflowers woven into the auburn waves. The church was filled to capacity not just with townspeople, but with hands from the Circle B and neighboring ranches who had come to see their respected foreman wed. Mr. Benson stood as Owen's best man, while Aunt Beatrice would give Cora away in the absence of a male relative. When the moment came to walk down the aisle, Cora felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Then she saw Owen waiting for her at the altar, his face transformed with love and wonder as he caught sight of her, and all nervousness vanished. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony was simple and deeply moving. When Owen recited his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Cora's face. I, Owen James Blackwood, take thee, Cora Elizabeth Haverly, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. Cora's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she repeated her own vows, but her heart was certain. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a beginning rather than a culmination. The reception afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. Mr. Benson made a toast that brought tears to many eyes, speaking of how he had watched Owen grow from a young hand into a man any father would be proud to call son. To Owen and Cora, he concluded, raising his glass. May your life together be as vast and beautiful as the Montana sky, and may your love be as enduring as the mountains. As the celebration continued around them, Owen drew Cora outside for a moment of quiet. The stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn. Mrs. Blackwood, he said softly, testing the name on his tongue. My wife. Cora smiled up at him, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible to contain it. My husband, she replied, reaching up to touch his face. Owen caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Are you happy, Cora? Truly. Happier than I ever thought possible, she assured him. Are you? I never knew such happiness existed, Owen confessed. When I think of how close we came to never meeting if I hadn't gone to check on those cattle that night, if you hadn't taken shelter in that particular barn. Perhaps it was meant to be, Cora suggested. Like a story written in the stars long before we knew it. Owen smiled, drawing her close. I like that thought. That somewhere, somehow, we were always destined to find each other. Their kiss beneath the Montana stars was a promise of love, of partnership, of a future they would build together on the land that was now theirs. The next morning they set out for their new home in the Judith Basin. Mr. Benson had loaned them a wagon for the journey, loaded with supplies and wedding gifts. Aunt Beatrice would follow in a few weeks, once she had settled her affairs in Willow Creek. The journey took 3 days, traveling through some of the most beautiful country Cora had ever seen. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the region's history, his pride in their new home evident in every word. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked their land, Owen drew the wagon to a halt. Below them stretched a valley of golden grass, with the silver ribbon of a creek winding through it. In the distance, their cattle grazed peacefully. The foundation for their house had already been laid, with stacks of lumber nearby ready for building. Welcome home, Cora, Owen said softly. For a moment, Cora couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the beauty of it, and by the knowledge that this was theirs, the beginning of everything they had dreamed of. It's perfect, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. Owen helped her down from the wagon and they stood together, surveying their domain. We'll build something wonderful here, he promised. Not just a ranch, but a legacy. Cora leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him. We already have, she replied. We've built a love that will endure through whatever challenges come our way. As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Owen and Cora Blackwood stood on their land, arms entwined, hearts full of hope and dreams for the future they would forge together, a future born in a cattle barn on a stormy night when a shivering girl found sanctuary in the warmth of a cowboy's coat and the simple word, "Stay." 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising to the Blackwood Ranch. The modest 4-room house Owen had initially built had been expanded twice, first to add a proper kitchen and dining room when Aunt Beatrice came to live with them, and again when their family began to grow. Their first child, James Owen Blackwood, had arrived less than a year after their wedding, a strong, healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful eyes. 2 years later, they welcomed Elizabeth Rose, named for both their mothers, a spirited girl whose auburn curls and determined nature reminded Owen daily of his beloved wife. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The railroad spur line through the Judith Basin had been completed as promised, making it easier to ship cattle to market. Owen's reputation for raising quality stock had spread, bringing buyers from as far away as Chicago. They now ran over 500 head of cattle and had added a small horse breeding operation specializing in sturdy, intelligent cow ponies. Cora had taken to ranch life with a determination that sometimes surprised even herself. She had learned to ride expertly, to help with calving, to manage the household accounts, and to be a partner to Owen in every sense of the word. The fine Boston lady was still there, in her impeccable grammar and her love of literature, but she had integrated those qualities with the practical skills needed for frontier life. On a warm June morning in 1887, Cora stood on the porch of their home, watching as Owen worked with a young horse in the corral nearby. At 35, he was in his prime, stronger and more confident than ever, with just a touch of silver beginning to appear at his temples. The sight of him still made her heart quicken, even after 5 years of marriage. "Mama! Mama!" 4-year-old James came running around the side of the house, his face alight with excitement. "Papa said I can ride Daisy today if you say it's all right," Cora smiled, ruffling her son's dark hair. "Did he now? And who will be holding Daisy's lead rope?" "Papa, of course," James replied as if it were obvious. "I'm not big enough to ride by myself yet. Papa says not until I'm 6 at least." "Then yes, you may ride Daisy," Cora agreed, her heart warming at her son's delight. Elizabeth, not quite 2, toddled out onto the porch clutching her favorite doll. "Me too, Mama," she asked hopefully. Cora lifted the little girl into her arms. "You can sit with Papa when he rides, sweetheart. You're still too little for Daisy." Elizabeth pouted momentarily, but was quickly distracted by the arrival of Aunt Beatrice, who emerged from the house carrying a tray of lemonade. "I thought you all might be thirsty," she said, setting the tray on the small table. "It's getting warm already." At 68, Aunt Beatrice remained remarkably spry, though she had begun to slow down in recent years. Her hair was now completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever and her mind equally so. She had become an integral part of their family, not just a helper but a beloved elder whose wisdom and stories enriched their lives. Owen, noticing the activity on the porch, turned the young horse over to one of their hired hands and joined his family. He swept Elizabeth from Cora's arms, lifting the giggling child high before settling her on his shoulders. "There's my princess," he said, reaching up to steady her. "Keeping your mama company, Papa ride," Elizabeth demanded, bouncing excitedly. "Later, sweetheart," Owen promised. "First, Papa needs some of Aunt Beatrice's lemonade." James tugged at Owen's free hand. "Don't forget, Papa, you said I could ride Daisy, and so you shall," Owen assured him. Right after lunch, the family settled on the porch, enjoying the lemonade and the mild June day. Cora watched her husband and children with a contentment that ran soul deep. This life, so different from what she had once imagined for herself, had brought her a fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. After lunch, true to his word, Owen took James to ride Daisy, a gentle mare specifically chosen for the children. Cora followed with Elizabeth, who insisted on not being left behind. Aunt Beatrice remained on the porch with her knitting, content to watch from a distance. "Up you go, son," Owen said, lifting James onto Daisy's back. The boy sat tall and proud, his small hands gripping the saddle horn as Owen had taught him. "Remember, gentle hands," Owen instructed, handing James the reins while keeping hold of the lead rope. "Daisy has a sensitive mouth." James nodded solemnly, taking his riding lessons very seriously. Owen led the mare in a slow circle around the yard, offering quiet encouragement to his son. Cora watched them, her heart swelling with pride and love. Elizabeth squirmed in her arms, eager to join her brother. "Me next, Mama." "Me next, when you're a bit bigger, darling," Cora promised. "For now, you can ride with Papa." After James had had his turn, Owen lifted him down and took Elizabeth from Cora. "Ready for a ride with Papa, Princess?" he asked, settling the little girl in front of him on the saddle. Elizabeth's delighted squeal was answer enough. Owen mounted smoothly, one arm securely around his daughter, and guided the horse in a gentle walk around the yard. As Cora watched her husband and daughter, with James now holding her hand and chattering excitedly about his ride, she was struck by how far they had come from that stormy night in the cattle barn. The cowboy who had wrapped her in his coat and told her to stay had given her not just shelter from a blizzard, but a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. That evening, after the children were asleep and Aunt Beatrice had retired to her room, Owen and Cora sat together on the porch swing, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the vast Montana sky. The air was cool and fragrant with the scent of wild sage and the roses Cora had planted along the front of the house. Owen's arm was around her shoulders, holding her close against his side. "Did I tell you Johnson offered to buy those yearlings?" he mentioned, referring to a cattle buyer from Helena who had visited the ranch that morning while Cora was busy with household tasks. "No, you didn't," Cora replied, looking up at him. "At what price?" Owen named a figure that made her eyebrows rise. "That's more than we got last year." "Our reputation's growing," Owen said with quiet pride. "People know Blackwood cattle are worth paying extra for." Cora laid her head against his shoulder, savoring the moment of quiet companionship. "You've built something remarkable here, Owen." "We've built it," he corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Cora." She smiled, acknowledging the truth of his words. "It's been a partnership from the start." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the creak of the swing and the distant call of a nighthawk. Then Owen spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You ever miss it? Boston, I mean. The life you might have had there." Cora considered the question seriously, knowing Owen deserved an honest answer. "Sometimes I miss certain things," she admitted. "The libraries, the concerts, the convenience of shops and services." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "But I've never, not for a single moment, regretted choosing this life with you." The expression that crossed Owen's face was one of such profound love and gratitude that it nearly took Cora's breath away. He drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day I wake up amazed that you're mine," he confessed. "That you chose this life, chose me." Cora reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features with gentle fingers. "Best decision I ever made," she said softly. "And I'd make it again, 1,000 times over." Owen captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that echoed the night before their wedding. "I love you, Cora Blackwood, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you," Cora whispered, "always and forever." Their kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown stronger with each passing year. As they sat together beneath the star-filled Montana sky, Cora knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be, not just in this place, but in this man's arms, in this life they had created together. The shivering girl in the cattle barn had found not just temporary shelter, but a permanent home in the warmth of a cowboy's love and the simple word that had changed everything: stay.